Welcome to the Wounds of the Faithful podcast, brought to you by DSW Ministries. Your host is singer, songwriter, speaker, and domestic violence advocate Diana Winkler. She is passionate about helping survivors in the church heal from domestic violence and abuse and trauma. This podcast is not a substitute for professional counseling or qualified medical help. Now, here is Diana.
Hello to my loyal listeners today. Thanks for joining me. Here comes the bride. Who doesn't love a crazy wedding story, right? Maybe not. Well, you're going to hear one today on part 8 of my story. I hope that you all enjoyed my husband on the podcast last week. He is normally very funny and always cracking jokes, but sounded a little bit more somber. He is tired all the time, as he mentioned last week. I was just glad that he was feeling well enough to come on the show. I think YouTube was a little bit more entertaining. Some shout outs I'd like to do today. A big shout out to Dean and Debbie, who are friends of ours from a previous church, and they reached out on social media, commenting on the podcast last week, and it was great to hear from you guys. Hope you're doing well, and thanks everybody for your prayers for Brian and the warm thoughts. It really warms his heart, and we need the support right now, as you can tell. Let's see, some other shout outs. Let's see, we got some more followers this week. Mickey Todd 747 and JHFLA 2020. And I'm wondering if you guys came from Christian Ninja on that platform on Twitch and Discord. One of you is Super Shot Gaming Zone. So welcome. Thanks so much for following. And we have one more week until 1 year anniversary of the podcast. And we will be having music as I promised. I finally got the permissions from the publishers to post the songs on the YouTube channel as well. It was not cheap. $100 per year per song. And you say, well, why don't you just play the music on YouTube? I mean, everybody does it. Well, it's because the songs don't belong to me. And it's wrong to use somebody else's music without permission. They are cracking down on the violations right now. They can take down my channel and my podcast. So as a songwriter anyway, I wouldn't want somebody using my songs without permission. And some of the publishers let me use the song that I asked for without paying them. I just have to give them the link to keep an eye on me. I cannot monetize any of the videos, which is fine. I'm not monetizing YouTube at all. Anyway, you'll get to hear the new songs next week. And if you're on my mailing list, you will get a free download. Now, I haven't even posted them on my store yet, so you guys get to hear them first. So go to my website at dswministries.org to sign up. All you have to do is go to the bottom of any page on my website to get the sign up form. You'll also get my hand-picked list of my best resources for abuse survivors. You'll be the first one to know about new music concerts that I'm going to have, meetups, even if Facebook goes down. You all heard the uproar. So I own my domain, so you can always find me on my website. I will also be having book giveaways on the anniversary episodes to those who share the episodes on social media with their favorite guest, and a takeaway. So next week, I'll be doing snippets of each of your favorite guests from this year. It's a great way if you are new here to the podcast to get a sampling of all of our guests that I've had on here. You can go back and listen to the entire episode of the ones that you find interesting or that apply to you. It is a gorgeous day here in the neighborhood. It went from 100 degrees to 80 degrees to 60 degrees with no easing into it. I've been enjoying going outside, and it's the time of the year that we enjoy the most. So let's dig into the story. I will be talking about the wedding, the honeymoon, and the first year of our marriage to my abusive ex-husband. I promise there won't be any graphic details, just talking in general terms. It will be PG rated. So the last episode that I had my story on, you heard about my dating my now ex, Danny, the red flags of an abusive man, and the engagement. And I reflected on some of the reasons why I didn't call off the wedding. I will continue to reflect on different events during my marriage to him in the same way. I want to point out some things for you, some lessons. Again, names are changed to protect the innocent and the guilty. I mention this again because I'm going to talk about some very personal stuff this week. I do not hate my abuser. I don't wish him harm or ill will of any kind. I am just telling my story because I think it needs to be told. I think that there are a lot of lessons to be learned. So again, let's get into the story. So I'll start with a couple days before the ceremony. As I mentioned last time, I stayed with some friends who turned out to have a terrible marriage. Awkwardville. My mom was coming into the wedding from Phoenix, and she was bringing her mother with her, who I hadn't seen in many years. My dad was coming from Phoenix also with my stepmother. My stepsister saved up money to come to the wedding all by herself. And my youngest brother came. Now, you heard about my sister who lives in France. I mentioned the situation with her before, and she wasn't invited to the wedding by my now ex-husband. Now, I don't remember my middle brother coming. I think my oldest stepbrother was in the Air Force at the time, so he wasn't there. But being from a divorced family, I was worried that my mom and dad were going to cause some problems by fighting like they always do. So I warned my mom not to start any trouble and to be on her best behavior. I was supposed to pick up my mom and my grandma, Jane, at the airport, and we were going to be staying in a hotel near the reception hall the night before. Now, I picked up my gown from my friend who did the alterations, and And that afternoon, I had to iron the dress myself in the hotel because I was afraid to give it to the dry cleaners, thinking that they would either ruin the dress or lose it or something bad. I was kind of little controlling over that dress. Again, this was a cathedral length train, so it took hours to press this dress. And we were married in January in the middle of a blizzard of all things. Don't ask me whose idea that was, but we got married in between semesters at school. We all arrived at the rehearsal dinner, and I was surprised that my grandmother was the one who was the troublemaker at the wedding. She was an abusive woman and swore like a sailor. We didn't see her a lot growing up because she was a really horrible person to be around. Somehow my mom's mom and one of my bridesmaids, Vicky, wound up carpooling to the rehearsal dinner in the middle of the snowstorm. Of course, visibility was probably zip. And they got lost and missed the exit and arrived late. Well, my uncle, my mom's brother, was coming to the wedding too, and Grandma wanted to see him. Well, she just screamed at Vicky and swore at her because they got lost. And Vicky's a very sweet gal with delicate ears. They arrived at the church with Vicky in tears and my grandmother still screaming and swearing. The actual rehearsal dinner went pretty well. It was the first time that my father had met Danny. My mother was angry at me because my dad was walking me down the aisle. And to this day, I never understood that because my dad and I had a really great relationship. I think it was just the whole thing, the bitter divorce that they went through. And anyway, I made it clear that it would not be anyone else but my dad walking me down the aisle. So I also would mention that my mom's mom was a racist as they come, and she was escorted by one of the groomsmen who happened to be Black. And I had my Japanese friend Miguel that we've talked about before on the podcast in the wedding party to escort Danny's grandmom, Fanny. So my grandmother was not very happy about the situation. Now, Danny's other groomsmen consisted of his brother, the best man, and his two childhood friends and a friend from church. My bridesmaids were my cousin, who was my maid of honor, who led me to the Lord, my sister-in-law, Vicky, who we mentioned, she was from our church, and Jen, who I've mentioned before from my childhood. So we went back to the hotel, and I really didn't sleep that much, as probably most brides don't. The morning of the wedding, there were reports that Danny had trouble with the car. So he was in his wedding attire fixing the car with his uncle a few hours before the wedding. I got dressed and did my hair and makeup myself, and the florist showed up with the bouquet. I picked pink and fuchsia and purple flowers for my nosegay. I wanted flowers that smelled good. That was very important. Now, it was the middle of January, so the florist did the best that they could. And I'm giving you all these details of the wedding because I know you girls are listening and you want the details. My mom made the silk bouquets for the bridesmaids and the boutonnieres for the guys. My color theme was teal. for the girls' dresses, and Danny and the groomsmen wore silver tuxedos. Now, the photographer was at the hotel to take pre-wedding photos. It was the closest thing that I got to a portrait. Now, I took the usual pictures with Mom and the attendants. The photographer showcased that train, let me tell you. I think the hotel staff got really nervous when the photographer stood me up on top of a table and draped the train onto the floor. Let me tell you, it made for a great picture. And no, I didn't fall off the table. So we did the whole traditional don't see the bride before the wedding thing. So me and Mom and the girls got into the limo and went to the church. I met my dad in the hallway to go down the aisle. I don't remember what my thoughts were before I went down the aisle. In my mind, it was too late to turn back at this point. The music started. It was not Here Comes the Bride, because I don't really like that song. It was Rachmaninoff, Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini. And the strangest thing was, I became very emotional. And I cried all the way down that aisle, all the way to where Danny was, waiting for me. Don't ask me why. To this day, I can't tell you why, but my dad was like, "Are you okay?" Because he had to hold up my wobbly legs. Maybe that was a bad sign. And the pastor even made a nervous joke about my emotions and stated to the audience that I wasn't going anywhere. And everybody laughed. There was no leaving the altar now. If you've been married, you know that things go by really fast in a blur. I had forgotten to mention to you that I wrote a song for our wedding, and I was going to sing the song during the ceremony. That was nerve-wracking enough, being emotional and trying to remember the words and the music up there. But I did get through it, surprisingly on pitch. And no, I will not sing the song. We wrote our own vows. When it came time to bring out the rings, the pastor made this comment about how huge Danny's ring was. Well, he had big hands. The pastor did a gospel message for my relatives that were there, many of which who had never heard a clear salvation invitation. I was very grateful for that. Anyway, the ceremony was over. We were pronounced husband and wife. We did the usual receiving lines, shaking hands with relatives that we only see once in a blue moon, right? We headed to the reception hall, which was very fancy. Most of my church friends have never been to a reception like that, ever. Again, they are used to a fellowship hall at the church. Everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves, even without the alcohol and the lack of dancing, which I was happy about. Mom had us stand up and face each other in front of our guests and played a song that she liked. I cannot for the life of me remember the song. You will be happy to know that when it came time for cutting the cake, I caught Danny off guard by shoving the cake in his face with the encouraging motions of my male relatives. Get up, get up, get up. Do it, do it, do it. Oh, I got him good. And there was cake all over everything, all over my dress, all over our face. I'll tell you, that was one of the best pictures in the stack, and I don't regret that at all. There were lots of pictures that we took downstairs in the foyer after dinner. I threw the bouquet and Vicky caught it. Surprisingly, my youngest brother dived clear across the foyer and landed in the splits and caught the garter. I mean, it was just, that was another great picture. I think he was 13 at the time. I don't even think he remembers that. So Danny's cousins that I told you about, the girls, they were talking to me before we left for the reception hall. And they were asking, hey, I heard that you're spending the night at such and such a hotel. My mother-in-law was the only one that knew where we were staying the night, because she's the one that made the reservation for us. So I got bent out of shape when the cousins rattled off the hotel name, because Danny's family was famous for mischief and pranks on the bride and groom on the wedding night. And I sure as heck didn't want that at all. So I made sure that I squashed that right there and then, and told them not to tell anybody where we were staying the night. Which thankfully nothing happened. So I said goodbye to my own family because I wouldn't see them for a long time. They were going back to Phoenix. Before we got into the car, my mother-in-law said that she would like to start fresh on a relationship and that she had made some mistakes. So I agreed, thinking that, okay, it would be smooth sailing from now on. You know, all the past is behind us. I didn't know that she was going through menopause at the time. So things actually would get dicier before they got better. So Danny and I spent the night in the hotel before we drove down to our bed and breakfast. It was in the mountains 4 hours away. Without getting graphic, as I promised, the only thing I will say about the wedding night itself was that he stated that he didn't want to do any of this foreplay stuff. Let's get to the main event. I'm sure that I have not been the only bride who has been shortchanged during the wedding night. We drove down to the bed and breakfast for the 3-day weekend. Just as we got to our destination, the car broke down again. All that the bed and breakfast had was like a wrench and needle nose pliers and maybe a screwdriver. So he was out there fixing the car again. I don't remember what was wrong with it though. So we had the 3rd floor to ourselves with a bathroom that had a clawfoot tub. I remember taking a very relaxing bath in that huge tub sometime during that weekend. There were 2 other couples on the lower floors, and we would meet each other at the breakfast table. And I remember the first time someone addressed me as Mrs. Danny, unpronounceable in the last name. My ex's name was hard to pronounce and hard to spell. And someone saying, your husband, was very strange. I was like, I am married. I can't believe it. Well, there were other things that I wouldn't believe that weekend also. So the first night there was bad. When you're on your honeymoon, I'm assuming that's when you're getting to know each other's bodies. And unless you've already slept together, there are things that you just don't know about your spouse. So we're in bed attempting intimacy. And I just pointed out some things about how my body works. I was just trying to be helpful. Do you remember when I told you that he said that he knew my body better than I did? Well, when things came down to it, it was obvious that he did not. Now, that's okay. We are getting to know one another. But he did not want me to help him at all. He did not want to be told anything. He was the man. Well, he was over-promising and under-delivering. He said, well, all the girls that I've been with like this. Well, I hate to break it to you, buddy, but I am not one of those other girls. I don't like it that way. Why don't you ask me what I like? Well, that was just too much for his ego. I mean, I didn't, make any negative comments like, well, your penis is too small, or laughed at him. I didn't do anything like that to warrant such a reaction from him. So this is what happens. He gets out of bed and gets dressed. And if you can guess what he does next, you've been paying attention to my story. He leaves the bed and breakfast at 9 o'clock at night and drives who knows where for 2 hours. I was left up in our suite all alone crying. Are you seeing a pattern here? This kind of behavior is very immature and childish. This is not a good start to a marriage. Is this how it's going to be whenever we have some sort of a disagreement or have sex again, that this is how he's going to deal with problems? I realized right then and there that I had made a mistake in marrying this man. And I was trapped. I mean, we've been married 24 hours and things are going bad. And yes, this would be a pattern throughout our marriage. But I was praying to the Lord as I was waiting for him to come back. I resolved to make lemonade out of lemons. I'm a Christian. I wanted to be true to our marriage vows. And I hoped that things would get better. I had no idea what would happen when he got back. Would he want a divorce? Was he going to get violent? Was he not going to come back at all? Well, yes, he did come back. And I was not in a good mood. And I was pretty much ready to go to sleep. I don't remember the conversation that we had afterwards. I certainly didn't say anything helpful for the rest of the weekend because I was afraid to set him off again. I don't think I talked much at all. We did attempt intimacy once more during the weekend, but not before he was complaining, "Do we have to do that again?" My jaw just dropped on the floor. I mean, isn't that what a honeymoon was for? Well, we took a lot of scenic drives around the area, which were very lovely. I guess that was better than dealing with him and the sex. And I think I found some books to read at the bed and breakfast. Well, Sunday, it was finally time to check out and go back home to our new apartment. We would start a new semester of school on Monday. Of course, we had to be back in time for church on Sunday. Not very many people from our college church came to the wedding since it wasn't there, but it was at our home church. So I remember sitting in church next to Danny, and he had his arm around me. And a nosy, busybody church lady tapped me on the shoulder and said something to the effect that there is no physical affection allowed for dating couples. You know, being in the mood that I was. So visibly annoyed, I shoved my hand into her face with my wedding rings on. And she immediately whispered, "Oh, congratulations." And I turned back around to finish listening to the sermon. We got applause when we walked back into school. 3 of the people in our bridal party went to school with us, and everyone knew that we got married during the break. And it was weird when our teacher said my new last name when doing roll call. We had 250 wedding guests, and my mother-in-law said that we had a lot of gifts. Our families were very generous. So she stated that she was going to drive down and bring our gifts. Okay, great. So the day came for her arrival, and we had our usual church work to do on Sunday, and I was tired, so I took a nap before she arrived, trying to be, fresh and rested. When she came in to our apartment, she immediately reprimanded me for having my coat on the back of the kitchen chair. She said, "Why don't you hang it up in the coat closet?" Well, because we don't have a coat closet. Well, how come you don't have a coat rack to put it on? And I was like, well, this is my home. So why are you telling me where I can put my coat? And she was like, "Well, Diana, you must be in a bad mood or something talking to me like that." We were to open the gifts when she was there, so she could help make the list for the thank you cards. And she must have thought that I was raised by wolves and didn't know what thank you cards were. And she bought us custom stationery with our married names on it. So her other argument that she started that weekend was about the dress. She asked what I was going to do with it, and I said I was going to sell it. I mean, I paid $1,000 for that gown. And she was like, "Why? It's so beautiful. Oh, why don't you save it for your daughter?" Because I am not going to assume that I will have a daughter or that this daughter would like this style of dress. I mean, it was a huge train and the big poofy sleeves, and very traditional. But she begged me to preserve this dress and even offered to pay for the dry cleaning. And she had the dress already up at her house. And so I agreed to it. Now we went home for a weekend to visit his parents for the weekend. I was supposed to examine the dress at the dry cleaners before it went into the box for preserving. I drove over there and looked at it, and all of the beads were melted on the dress. I just couldn't believe it. So I asked the dry cleaner, what happened? He said, well, they were cheap plastic beads. I said, did you know that this was going to happen? He said, yes. The lady who dropped off the dress signed the release form. My mother-in-law signed a release form. So, of course, I'm running back to the house and I am angry as a hornet. So I told her the gown was all melted and ruined. Why did you sign a release form? Well, she said that she didn't drop off the dress. She gave it to her assistant at work, Claudia, and she's the one that signed the release. Well, I was angry about that too because I entrusted the dress to my mother-in-law, not to her assistant. I didn't get a call or anything about it. I had no clue this was going to happen. So I pointed out to her, okay, now I can't sell it, I can't wear it or preserve it. So I complained to my new father-in-law. He was the voice of reason and tact. He always was. And he said to me, yes, that was wrong. I will pay for the gown to be rebeaded. So please send the bill to me. So that was about $200 for the alteration specialist to rebead the gown. And that was pretty cheap actually for the amount of beads on that dress. And so I put it in a box and stuck it in the closet. But I started cleaning houses right before we got married. And I was in the last year of school, but I had a couple credits short of graduating. So I had to do a correspondence course on top of my regular school load. And this was back before the internet. Again, you couldn't just do a course online. There was no such thing. You had to do a paper course, send it in. They had to grade it manually and send it back in the mail. It got to be too much working full time and doing the ministry. So I asked Danny if I could quit working so I could plow through that correspondence course so I could graduate this year. He almost didn't let me. He wanted me to keep working. He said, well, you can graduate next year. And I said, no, I only have one class that I need to finish, and I want to graduate with my class because the pastor, the leader of the school, had always told us that none of you guys, half of you guys aren't going to make it to graduation. So I saw that as a challenge. I wanted to graduate that year. Now, he had a job at Pep Boys at the time as a mechanic, and that was right down the street. And they used to say really crude things about me and about him. And he was the only Christian in his workplace. And he told me that he once did a roundhouse kick to some guy at work because they said something really horrible. I don't remember if he got in trouble for that or not, but yeah, he did have a temper, as we all know. But yeah, Pep Boys and that kind of environment is pretty toxic. I probably would have roundhouse kicked them too. So 2 weeks after we were married, it was football playoffs. He watched football all the time. In fact, he watched every sport imaginable. And we had not been intimate at all since we got back from our not so great honeymoon. And I was wondering why he didn't seem interested in me. So I put on my feminine charms and got into one of my new nighties and paraded around the living room. He ignored me at first, and then he said I was blocking the TV. Okay. So I went back into the bedroom and I got dressed and decided to call the counselors that we had for premarital counseling before we were married. So I called up Margaret and I said, here's what's going on. What should I do? Why isn't he interested in sex? And she said, well, he's probably just tired. Give him some time. So I finished the phone call, and after the game was up, I confronted him as to what was going on. Newlyweds usually can't keep their hands off one another. Well, he responded that I put too much pressure on him to have sex. Too much pressure? You haven't touched me in 2 weeks. I asked him if he was sorry that he had married me. I mean, I'm just going to come right out and say it. Well, he said no. I guess he needed, somebody to cook and clean and run his errands and help him with his schoolwork. I don't doubt that. Well, that was the pattern of our entire marriage. I think it was another week before anything intimate happened. He seemed to be preoccupied with me getting pregnant because he would always ask me beforehand if I took my birth control pill. Did you take your pill? Did you take your pill? Did you take your pill? Not necessarily what a girl wants to hear. When we would go to his family events, they would all call us the bride and groom. I think they called us that for 5 years. They were all making newlywed jokes, and Uncle Mike said to me, your face looks full. Are you pregnant? No. I wanted to scream, you need an actual sex life to get pregnant. But I wouldn't say that to my favorite uncle, would I? Well, my mother and father-in-law insisted that I leave the bedroom door open for air circulation. And I was like, what? No. I was a little bit self-conscious being a newlywed and valuing my privacy. Believe it or not, that was one of the few times that he was interested in sex, was at his parents' house. We stayed in his old bedroom next to his parents. He told me he wanted them to hear us. Like, he said he wanted them to think that we were happily married. I was pretty resentful at being used for show. You don't hold my hand or have sex with me at home, but you want to put on a facade for your parents? Forget it. So he decided that he didn't want to finish school after a year and a half of attending. He claimed to know more than the teachers did. All the teachers were former students, pastors, or missionaries. He dropped out. Strange thing was, he would boast to anyone that cared that he went to Bible college and boasted about all of the knowledge he had. And the days that he was putting other people down for not going to Bible college or not knowing all of the stuff he knew, I would point out that he never finished school. So he needed to shut his trap. So my graduation came in June, and I barely got the coursework done before the deadline. I had 3 classmates graduating with me. Kevin, who I've mentioned before, my friend from our home church, and Ricardo, who had 8 children, I believe. Went to school, and he was a pastor of a church, and he had 8 children. So both of them are pastors today. Kevin is in Australia, and Ricardo, I believe, is in Washington, D.C., in the inner city. So we'll hear more about Kevin in the future, because I just connected with the rest of his family, who agreed to come on the show and talk about their abuse story. So I'm going to have his brother Jason, who is a pastor in Australia also, and their mother Joy, who was raped and abused by her husband, their father. So anyway, me and Kevin got along pretty well. He was always a good friend. But we sang a mission song together for the ceremony. I think it was Make Me a Blessing. Pastor Scott came down for my graduation and gave me a really nice study Bible book that I still have. I think it's Through the Bible. I think it was from a radio program. Good book. I still have it. Danny's childhood friend, Kathy, came to see me graduate in crutches. She missed our wedding, and I think she was skiing and had a ski accident or something. It was good to see her. None of my family members came. I don't think that they thought it was a real school. I don't know. It was in Arizona. Maybe I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that it was far away and they couldn't afford the flight again, but they may have been half right about it not being a real school. The pastor in charge of the school gave me a $5 gift Bible with my name on it and the name of the school. It wasn't even a nice Bible. Yeah, I still have it, but I was like, the guys got these really, really nice Bibles with the gold lettering on the side, and like I said previously, the guys got pastoral theology degrees. I took the exact same classes except for one, and I got a Christian service degree. I worked really hard for that degree, as I've stated. But very few people graduated. I was very proud of the fact that I actually finished the course. I finished the race, okay? Very, very few women graduated from that school. I think there were 3 to be exact that I know of. But that chapter was behind me now, and we were now free to start our church planting. It's the whole point I went to school in the first place. So we'll stop here. We will start next week with how we started the church planting and the ministry that we were part of, and unfortunately, more of the abuse. But I appreciate you guys showing up and listening to my story. I know some of it's uncomfortable to listen to. Some of it is maybe kind of funny. You think that's normal to live through something like that? Well, we'll talk more about what is normal, what's not normal. I can tell you, looking back on my own wedding and my first year of marriage, that is not a healthy marriage. That is not normal. Well, I shouldn't use the word normal. Nobody knows what the word normal means, but that is not what God intended for marriage. It's not the original design. So we'll talk more about that in the coming podcast episode. So I'm really excited for next week for our anniversary episode. So don't forget, please tune in next week and invite your friends. Share the episodes. So until then, I hope you guys have a great week. God bless.
Thank you for listening to the Wounds of the Faithful podcast. If this episode has been helpful to you, please hit the subscribe button and tell a friend. You can connect with us at dswministries.org, where you'll find our blog along with our Facebook, Twitter, and our YouTube channel links. Hope to see you next week.